I always say, why predict technology? And I think the real answer is B, to identify disruptive change. And of course, the other ones apply to a certain degree. And of course, in your lives, you are going to be always predicting technology. So is it worth buying iPhone 12? Is it worth buying interactive voice device? What's going to develop next year? Is it worth spending now or spend in the future? And then this is personal. When you are in business, you are constantly making some of these assessments, or someone in it. And then let me read you this. Well, Telegram, every telegram consists in itself. Do you know what a telegram is? I think you do. Consists in itself of a written record of what we communicated. Bell's instrument, Alexander Graham Bell's instrument, uses nothing but the voice, which cannot be captured in concrete form, and therefore will be no record of what was said or agreed upon. We leave it to you to judge whether any sensible man or woman, Abby, would transact his or her affairs by this means of communication. Bell expects that subscribers to this service will pay to have instruments installed in the premises, installation charges, and thereby will pay for each call made with a monthly minimum if no calls are made. We feel that it is unlikely that any substantial number of people would agree to such an arrangement in the view of the telegraph offices, which are now giving efficient round-the-clock service in every neighborhood and the smallest towns, which charge only actual message according to them. I usually ask to guess who did this, and the answer is Western Union. And what is Western Union? Western Union was the largest telecommunication company in the world in the turn of the 18th century to the 19th century, and now they are nothing. They are a little company that sells wire around the world. And so reading that, in conclusion, the committee had to be a committee, feels that must advise against any investment, whether on their scheme. We do not doubt there will be find a few use in special circumstances, such between the bridge of a ship and the engine rooms. But any development kind and scale will bear so fondly imagines utterly of the question. So this is the largest telecommunication company in the world saying this. You know what happened? Bell went another direction, got one client, got two clients, finished up with Bell, which was AT&T, and that time AT&T was the largest telecommunication company in the world, and was like today Apple is, or something like that, bigger than that, a total monopoly on the business, until the US in the 80s decided to break it up. Okay, which a lot of people think that now it was a very bad idea, because at that time the US had the best telephone system, telecommunication system in the world, best research, Bell Laboratories with 20,000 scientists, and now look what's happening. The US is not the leader in many of these things, and the telephone service is so got better. Okay, and I'm going to do this, but maybe you want to look at it. And this talks really about when the US became important. And the US basically became important after the Second World War. In the Second World War, it projected itself. And so basically what you're saying, that countries come and go. And that's basically has to do with technologies they adopt and how do they treat their people, and et cetera, et cetera. This is actually an article in 2005, a book by this guy, Tom Friedman, that you still can see in the New York Times. And he talks about big changes in the world, and talk about political, technological, and process. And actually, the two things that he said were the biggest one was the fall of the Berlin Wall, separating Eastern Europe from Western Europe, and the opening of China. Netscape went going public, just basically opened up for the startups in electronics. And he basically says, the book is very interesting and there are follow-ups on it, and talks about convergence, and many of his predictions in 2005 have materialized today. And then this guy, Andrew McAfee, and he's a very interesting guy. He's a professor at Sloan School, MIT, and he works with with Eric Broshan. They are basically both economists, and they talk about the influence economy of technology. And you should, if you have a chance, read. When I sent you the list of books to be read, their book is in there. But I think this is actually very interesting and worthwhile to talk at the last minutes we have together. And what is this idea of a general purpose technology? Okay, it's a technology that changes everything in everyone's life. And you say, well, now we are having the big technological change. There have been many. First one is plowing the ground. Basically allowed agriculture to be reactivated every year. And so people didn't have to move and could stay in their village. Very powerful technology. Between plowing and trains, we had Gutenberg's printing press. Very big technology. And then trains kind of created the development, very interesting development. The development before was along the rivers. Now the development after trains was around the train routes. And then electric power, people forget, meaning I say, there is a lot of discussion about sabotage and about this and that. But, the core of U.S. economy is its electric network. And just think about what would happen if the power grid is broken up. I mean, you can't use your computers, you have no internet, goes on and on. Your cell phone will die in 24 hours, goes on and on and on. So very, very interesting effect. And we talked about Graham Bell. Thomas Edison was the one that kind of developed it in the US. And again, changed everyone's life, because not only you can work day and night, but you can power everything. And it's really very powerful. And then the other thing that happened, and you notice that the time frames, every time a little bit shorter and shorter, or much shorter. Then when I was at Bell Labs, the big thing we talked about that was the development of semiconductors. And the transistor was invented in the labs, and then putting the transistors into a chip for the thousands and now to the many millions, started the labs and became everywhere. And that really changed our lives. Lasers, yes, but I don't think the effect was so big as a transistor or electric power. Now the internet, that's a big, very big facilitator. And the internet changed a lot of people's life. And these are general purpose technologies to be applied with everything. And so I'm going to skip this. And I actually, again, back to the telephone thing. In 1969, AT&T announced its annual report that the picture phone service may be $1 billion business by 1980. And actually, by 2000, it wasn't $1 billion business. And their idea of a picture phone was basically the same phone that many of you had when you were young at home, meaning the wire, before you cut the wire. And it had a screen. And when they launched it, they sold terminals for $1,500 in each side. And this is, 40 years ago. So if you translate in today's dollars, you're talking about $10,000 telephone. Okay, and surprise, the thing didn't catch up. In the 80s, I wrote a memo about this, and I said, you have to really reduce the price when they launched it, which was 20 years later. And they divided by 2 instead of 1,500, they made it 750, still no one bought it. So it was really bad prediction. But if you think about this, the idea of two people talking and seeing each other in a ubiquitous manner is very powerful. And you all do it now. We are doing it at this moment. But the device has changed and the way you do it changed, and the cost is infinitesimal compared with that. I love this quote. And the other day I was talking with a friend of mine, and he said this quote, and I said, this is great. I always use it in class. If they ask a user what they want in relation to candles, they would have said longer burning, smokeless candles, never the light bulb. And I find this is a profound truth. What does that mean? Is that if you are a user and very close to the event, you don't think about something very different. I always learned in my days that I worked with computers and organizations that the users were very good to tell me to add a column, to summarize a number, and et cetera, but they never really thought about a better architecture. They never thought about a continuous audit. They told me, oh yeah, you can go to the client early in the morning, you can watch what they're doing. They came up with some very day-to-day type of ideas. And so actually the conclusion here, sorry, the yellow is not very visible, is users are not very good champions of revolutionary change. Okay, and I'm going to go to this. Marconi invented the radio, wireless, the wires in 1894. In 1920, someone had the idea of radio to many people. From 1894 to 1920, not very much things happened with wireless. But the moment the business model showed up that someone paid for advertising and many people listened, it became very important. So there are two things. There is the technology and there is the economic model around it. And it's very important to think about both, because you're bad in one of the two, you don't succeed. The recent history is full of cases whereby one product was technologically much better than the other, but the other one caught on because it had a much better business model. Okay. And the other thing to remember with technology is that you invent technology to do a certain thing. Marconi invented the radio to have two people communicate to each other. Actually, radio transmission, broadcasting was a much bigger business. TV is a much business. And of course, all come from Marconi. So secondary usage of technology is very important. You see the internet. You know, the internet was basically to communicate to people in electronic form. Okay, and it's not as recent as you think. The actual internet was funded by the US government. But before that, actually there have been telecommunication. A guy called Kleinrock at UCLA, where I was getting my doctorate, I was already having experiments with that in the, when was it? In the 70s. And then they developed all these kind of private networks supported by the US government. One of them was ARPANET and BitNet. And then they had the idea, the Department of Defense says, you know, we need an alternate network to integrate this network, so in case someone bombs AT&T, we have another place to go. And so, you know, you don't criticize the US government so badly. The US government actually had done a lot of very useful things in technology. And they had the wisdom of, once the internet was starting to move, to pull out and finance research, but let private enterprise run it. And that's why the internet, again, was like the telephone system, private, and developed much better in the US than most other places. And so what do I say about technology and business? Technology facilitates, create things, but the business model creates a real use. Different business model create different products. And again, technology and business model, different things, and both require creativity. I'm going to skip a couple of things here. And I typically talk about the diffusion of telephony, which is a very good example, but we don't have time, and talk about Polaroid and what happened there, and about more recently, about satellite telephony. And what you basically notice that some things had a good business model, others didn't. Some was too expensive, others didn't. And basically, you need to kind of look at the particular application and try to understand the best. This is the prediction of technology. And of course, I put in here the electric cars. What's going to happen with electric self-driving cars or self-driving cars? Are they going to happen? Absolutely, they are going to happen. We thought, many of us, that they would be around today in 2020. They are not. The problem was more difficult and the infrastructure wasn't in place. However, there are many trucks being driven in the highways in Europe that are, instead of having two drivers, only have one. And they are basically self-driving on the highways, but they are not self-driving on the streets of Europe. And of course, there are self-driving cars around in Pittsburgh, in California, in Nevada being experimented. Uber has a fleet in Pittsburgh. And at this moment, the law basically says you have to have someone sitting next or in the car driving. That doesn't do any good. When the thing went crazy and killed the lady, the guy was sitting in there, but he was playing with his cell phone or something. Very difficult to control this. But the question is not if self-driving cars are going to kill anyone. They definitely will. The question is, are they going to kill much less people than we kill today? And what's going to be the secondary effect? I don't have any doubt that in 10 years will there be a market share, substantial market share on self-driving cars. Electric, a little bit slower to get in there for other reasons. Okay, but I think that's a pretty good prediction. And I want to talk about one more thing, is about the work of this guy, Clay Christensen. He's Harvard professor. He passed away last year. And he was actually, did a dissertation on disk drive technology. And basically, there were many disk drive technologies, and then there was a whole evolution of the market around this drive. And he learned how that thing happened, and he became like the grand guy of innovation. You should pick up Clay Christensen's videos. I have several if you wanted, but you just go on the internet, pick it up on YouTube, and etc. And here he's talking about innovation. And that's probably, it was called Innovator's Dilemma, was published maybe 20 years ago. And he perfected that rule. In his late life, he talked a lot about innovation in universities, and he was not very kind about Harvard. I don't know how the dean felt about it, but he kept saying they had the obsolete model. Actually, one thing I like a lot, he said, he used to say, he said, you know, Harvard was founded by the Pilgrims. And basically they were teaching Bible, but came to a point that they have taught everything that they could teach in Bible. So they had to invent some new things to teach. So they started doing research at Harvard to invent things to teach. And that's actually what created the university that does research. I think that's kind of cool. I liked it. Okay, and so this is the book, and there are a whole set of it, and I'm not going to talk about it. But I want to talk about this for a second as my final thing here. He basically divides technology into disruptive and sustaining. Sustaining is just an evolutionary technology. Disruptive is something that changes everything in that particular industry. And then his book, Innovator's Dilemma, says, The Innovator's Dilemma, why big successful companies fail. And basically his argument is that if your technology changes very much, your business model gets destroyed. And therefore, companies that are very successful stay with the business model instead of themselves killing their own business model. Example of that is Polaroid, Eastman, Kodak, one after the other. AT&T. Now, AT&T had the luck because cell phone basically ate AT&T up because all the money came from wired telecommunication. But the advantage was that those wires in the ground also transmitted more efficiency the internet. So they managed to survive in that. And I bet you that in this class, half of you don't have a landline, maybe more than half. And I asked this question 10 years ago, everyone would have a landline. And why is that? Because you guys have better cell phones, and you have to have the cell phone is more useful than a landline, and it replaced the landline. But basically what his argument was, and his story that he told over and over in many, many different industries, was, you start a little business, okay, that it breaks the technology, and the big technology company doesn't notice you. By the time that they realize that that industry is going to be a leading industry, that part of the industry, maybe it's too late. AT&T saw the wireless telephone domain start. Actually, I wrote a memo within the AT&T arguing that we should develop a cell phone company. They said, oh, we don't know how to run one of these companies, and it's kind of ridiculous. The chairman of AT&T was an ex-president of Bell of Pennsylvania. They knew how to run a small company. But they finished up buying for $5 billion emerging cell phone company, and they did quite well. But then the economics got bad, and they sold it out. And then AT&T was forced to dismember, and basically one of the companies that dismembered, SBC, finished up buying AT&T that had gone from 300,000 people to 30,000 people. And SBC recovered the name. They were one of the baby bells, so they recovered the name of AT&T, bought Bell South 2, and that became the modern AT&T. And interesting enough, those two had bought the AT&T wireless, and so they actually, it's like Humpty Dumpty come back again. AT&T wireless became AT&T again. So very interesting how it happens in disruptive model. And this is just an example how companies are so bad in developing a good technology and keeping it going. This is actually Xerox Parc, which is Xerox research side, like the Bell Labs of Xerox, and they developed all these new technologies, and they were not the market leaders on any of them. Okay, because they would destroy their model, or they didn't have the horses, or they had no interest and vision. So they had great technology development, horrible business development. And you see what happened with Xerox. Xerox is a small company. And so this is actually the final slide I'm going to show. I'm going to stop here. And that's the innovator's dilemma. Separate technologies between sustaining and disruptive. And think about disruptive as this is going to change this industry. And it's typically not going to start in the big companies. It's going to start in a small company that will become very, very big. And if you think carefully, you look at Apple, what happened with Apple, you look at Google. Google actually was a small company, and basically I'm sorry, I didn't mean Google. I mean Amazon was a very small company trying to sell books. Look what they are now. And so it basically went into the markets of many other companies. So that's kind of what a disruptive technology is. And read the book is really good, although a little bit out of fashion at this moment. Okay, I'm going to stop here, but I want to read you these rules. Okay, large organizations resist and inhibit innovation. Users are not very good champions of evolution or change. They don't know. Ensuing users far outweigh the original intent. Is one after the other examples. Technology and business model are different, but both require creativity. A bad business model or immature technology can doom a good idea.